welcome to today's edition of the Diane Rehm Book Club. First, I want to welcome you all here and apologize for the slight delay in starting today's book club with Diane. We're working through a little technical difficulty, and so Diane will be off camera until we can get her camera fixed, but you will get the joy of hearing Diane's amazing questions with our special guest author today. I am Chief Advancement Officer here at WAMU, and it is such a privilege, and I'm so proud to be able to present programming like the Diane Rehm Book Club to you. We appreciate your support today and every other day. It's only through the generosity of our members that we are able to provide exclusive access to programming like this. A few housekeeping. If you have questions, please use the Q&A function today. If you would like to access closed captioning, down at the bottom of your Zoom screen is the CC button. Just click that and you'll be able to access the closed captioning. So without further delay, please let me welcome Diane Rehm.
Okay, sorry about all this, everybody. It will not in the least hurt my pleasure of welcoming Anna Quindlen to talk about her latest novel, After Annie. Annie Brown, the main character in this book, was mother, wife, best friend, and a beloved aide at a nursing home. But one day she suffered a brain aneurysm and poof, she was gone. This left an enormous hole in the lives of her family and her best friend. So in this book, Anna tells the story of those left behind, how they changed, grew, and learned to live with loss. One reviewer calls the work a gently gleaming gem of a book, and I couldn't agree more. After Annie is Anna Quindlen's 10th novel. She was also a journalist and an opinion columnist for the New York Times, for which she won a Pulitzer Prize. Anna Quindlen, I am thrilled to have you join us today. It's been too long.
I agree, Diane, and I know we keep talking about technical difficulties here, but the truth of the matter is, for lots of people on this Zoom, I bet you this is a kind of blast from the past because they spent years and years and years hearing you as a voice on the radio.
Well, you're right about that. And today you are going to be on screen, and we'll just see whether any repairs can be made mid-program. But to begin, Anna, your opening sentence, Annie Brown died right before dinner. So as a writer, tell me why it's important to tell us exactly when she died and even what she was serving for dinner.
Well, I love novels that you live in, where you're sitting in the chair and you go so deeply into the place, whether it's a room or a town, that you almost forget about the world around you. That you look up after an hour and think, "Oh, yes, I'm in my own living room." Those are the books I love to read, and those are the books that I want to write. And I really wanted you from the beginning to be right there in the Brown household, in the kitchen, which is always the heart of the house, to see and to feel that moment when Annie Brown falls to the floor. You said, "Poof, she's gone," and literally that's true, but the point of this novel is that, um, emotionally, psychologically, in all the ways that I suppose, count, Annie is the most dominant character in this book.
Absolutely. She's not gone because she lives on in the lives of the people she has left behind. You do such an important thing. You take us first into the life of her oldest child, Allie. And Allie really has to almost take the place of her mother because there are 3 younger children, and it's a tough job to be left that way. Of course, there is her husband, Bill, but Bill is so overcome at first by grief that he's not really seeing what's happening.
It's not only grief, Diane. I think that for a lot of us, in my experience, it mainly happens to men, but sometimes it happens to women as well. We don't realize how there's a person who is creating all the small pieces of our life until they're gone. I mean, Bill Brown hasn't had to worry about whether the kids are wearing shoes that fit. And he hasn't had to worry about whether there's milk in the fridge because his wife has, perhaps with some slight resentment, but relatively happily, taken care of all those things. And suddenly he wakes up one morning not only without the woman who he really loves, but without this vast safety net that she's provided for his life. And initially he has no clue what it consisted of and no clue how to provide it.
You know, it's so interesting, Anna. Your own mother died when you were only 19, the exact age I was when my mother died. And you wrote about that death in the book One True Thing. I watched that movie just the other night. What about your relationship with her? How long had you known she was ill? You came home from college to take care of her.
I hadn't known very long that my mother was ill. This was in the early 70s, which was a time when it was considered wise to keep a cancer diagnosis from the patient herself, which now seems incredible to us.
Yes,
I mean, so
yes.
much of what's happened. I remember talking about the difficulty of finding a vein at some point, and one of my friends said to me, "Well, didn't your mother have a portacath?" And I said, "The portacath was invented in 1982.
Huh,
My mother died in 1972. Hospice, which we talk about so often now, really didn't exist then. So,
exactly.
I only knew for about 3 months, how ill my mother was. And, to say that I came home from college and took care of her makes me sound like a bit of a heroine, and the truth of the matter is I did it with very bad grace, and I have a lot of regrets about how I did it, at the same time that if I hadn't done it, I would have many more regrets about that.
I think you and I share a great deal of emotional heartache about the deaths of our mothers. Mine was only 49 when she died. I think yours was about the same age.
My mother was 40.
Ugh, such a loss. Well, tell us about her husband, Bill. That is Annie's husband, Bill. He adored his wife, who'd actually gotten pregnant before they were married, and perhaps if she hadn't been pregnant, they might never have married. How do you believe that affected their marriage?
I don't believe that that much affected their marriage. I think that it affected the way outsiders, particularly Annie's best friend, Anne Marie, saw their marriage. Um, Throughout their friendship, Anne Marie has continued to act as though Annie sort of dealt down in some level, that she could have had so much more. And there's this moment where they're together and Anne Marie's kind of prodding her with that, and Annie says, I know what I'm supposed to want and I know what I have. um and and I think Annie is that person. She looks around and says, God, I wish I had a bigger kitchen. I wish I had a nicer car. I wish I made more money. And then in the last analysis, she looks around at her four kids and her husband and her life and thinks, I'm fine with this. And
Yes.
I think those kinds of people are kind of a gift to all of us. The tagline on the poster for One True Thing, the movie that you mentioned, which I think is a wonderful movie, um,
Yes.
says, "Love what you have." And I
Hmm.
think that ability to love what you have and to not always be looking over the shoulder of your own life to who's entering the room, I think that's such a gift.
You're absolutely right. I must say, I felt such heartache for Allie. I mean, just a simple thing like seeing her father cry for the first time. That's a very difficult moment for any child, but she sees it and it affects her really deeply.
Look, you know as well as I do from personal experience, there's that moment in the movie of The Wizard of Oz when Dorothy opens the door and it's in black and white and suddenly everything's in Technicolor. Well, when you have someone you love die, I think particularly your mother when you're young, it's the reverse of that. Everything's been in Technicolor and suddenly the door opens and you're in black and white. And that sort of never ends. It goes from grief to loss. Um, Grief, I think, is not forever, but loss is, and it's one of the
Indeed.
things that Allie will be living with for the rest of her life.
And Allie is only 13 at the time her mother dies. So, in effect, because her husband is so wounded, it is she who has to take charge. And one of the children, Anthony, they call him Ant, the younger brother, is going through his own tough times. He's all of a sudden afraid his father is going to get married again right away.
Well, Ant's a funny guy. I think he was kind of a mixed bag even before his mother died, in that way that sometimes second children are. But I do want to say a word in defense of Bill Brown because I'm asked all the time about whether it's easier for me to write female characters than male characters. And the answer is yes, of course. It was much easier for Philip Roth to write male characters than female characters. Ditto Dickens. We bring a lot of who we are to the table. And I was a little worried about writing Bill Brown in the beginning. And then he turned out to be such a good dude that I knew that at a certain point he was going to step up. Now, he needs to be prodded by the school counselor, who, in my opinion, is in some ways the hero of this piece.
Yes,
But
yes,
he's
yes.
still, once he is prodded, he does the right thing, and I think he's a guy who's gonna do the right thing for his kids for the rest of their lives. I really, really like and appreciate him, even though in the beginning, he's completely paralyzed by circumstances.
It's so interesting that the school counselor who is helping Allie through all this then is helping Bill as well.
Well, because I think at a certain point, Diane, she not only is helping Allie, but then she's working with Ann. And at a certain point, I think she realizes that what really kind of needs to be done here is some version of family therapy where she
Yes.
can't just be talking to them in a vacuum. And she's so good at her job, and she's so good about talking to him in a way that really that really speaks to him. And that isn't in any way accusatory. That I think she does uh, what what those of other faiths might call a mitzvah for that family.
Here is a question we received before the program from Sally, who says, I'm an inveterate reader and have often quoted or misquoted you that you had as a child the gift of boredom. I had that too, she says. And later, I was the bad mom on the block who resisted TV and video games and encouraged my kids, now in their 30s, to figure out something to do. They sure didn't then, but now they've all thanked me for that. Today's parents have a far harder time giving their kids the gift of boredom. What advice do you have for them?
Well, exactly what you just said, Sally. I wrote a column once called "Doing Nothing is Something," because I really feel like creativity grows when you're like poking in the dirt with a stick. Creativity doesn't grow when you bounce from one enrichment program to another. I didn't learn to be a writer by taking an SAT prep course. I learned to be a writer through endless summer afternoons where I was reading books and complaining endlessly to my mother about how bored I was and how boring everything was, and so on and so forth. And I think the more we can make space for our kids not to do stuff. I mean, I remember, you know, despite what was going on with everybody else, passing on weekend sports because I wanted my kids to come out to our place in the country and hang out, the three of them together. And I remember feeling often like they were missing something because of that. They also weren't allowed to have video games. And about 10 or 15 years ago, the boys indicated to me that they thought that had been a wise decision, and you could have knocked me over with a feather. Now, all three of them are what you might call creatives. Um, so, there's a price to be paid for that. Creatives are not necessarily making hedge fund money, but I think on balance, it was really the right thing to do. And you're right with phones and iPads and social media, it gets harder and harder to do that. But I think you can put the guardrails up for young kids in a way that will pay off when they're older.
You mentioned your column. You were both a reporter and columnist for the New York Times and also for Newsweek for many years. You won the Pulitzer for commentary in 1992, and then you left journalism. How come? Was it no longer satisfying for you?
Oh, no, no. I mean, being a reporter, I always say is the best job I will ever have. I loved it so much. But I was a little girl who was an inveterate reader. And at a certain point, I looked around the library shelves and thought, I want to be one of those people. I really want to be one of those people.
Mm.
And I'd always wanted to be a novelist. And there came this moment where I was writing 2 columns a week for the Times. I had 3 little kids, and I
Wow.
was trying to write a novel at the same time. And I don't know who that was, but I don't ever want to be her again. And something had to give. Something had to give, and the kids were not gonna give, and I really wanted to be a novelist, and so I decided to give up the Times column, later circled back to Newsweek only because as opposed to 2 columns a week, that was 1 column every other week. But I mean, I found journalism thrilling, um, especially for a certain kind of girl, certain kind of Catholic girl, to be able to go places where you wouldn't normally go and ask questions you wouldn't normally ask. It was fantastic. And I think I became a better novelist because I was a reporter.
Good for you. Good for you.
Go down.
Another character I want to ask you about in After Annie is Annie's mother-in-law.
I knew this was coming. I knew
You
this
knew
was
it was coming. She plays a big role. Sorry about my doggie. She's just running out the door.
coming.
She plays a big role and not a very sympathetic one. And somehow she holds the strings. But Annie got used to ignoring her. Talk about the strings she held over Annie and Bill's family.
Well, she owns their house. She rents the house to them. Um, I have to say, I am an unreconstructed Dickens person. I love all of Dickens' work. I've learned so much from it. And one of the things that I learned from it is that your protagonist obviously is critical to the book, but the most fun are the broad secondaries. I mean, that's why we all remember Miss Havisham or Uriah Heep. They're close to being cartoons, but not quite. And so Dora Brown is one of those broad secondaries. She's horrible, but
She's horrible.
every time she showed up on the page, I was really happy because the things that she said and the way that she acted were so over the top that I could channel something that you can't really channel with your protagonist. And, you know, the moment um, well, Annie stands up to, but the moment where Allie stands up to her is just a moment where suddenly you see that even though her father is now stepping up as the head of the household, that Allie has become a, a young woman of a certain kind who is not going to suffer listening to foolishness gladly. And I think that's a moment in the book that couldn't have happened if Dora Brown wasn't so so terrible in every way. The other thing, of course, that she illustrates, and I think this is really important, is one of the reasons why Bill is so enamored with Annie, especially once their children are born, is that he's seeing a vision of motherhood that was totally foreign to him and that is so alluring.
Absolutely.
This
Yeah.
idea of a woman who embraces the role as opposed to his mother, who's basically like, whatever, whatever, take care of yourself, and
Yeah,
I do think
not a very pretty picture of a mother-in-law, and we know there are some like that. We hope that as older women, we can be gracious mothers-in-law and not follow that pattern expressed in your book. Here's a question from Virginia, who says, Annie, Anne Marie, Anna, is there a significance in these names?
Oh gosh, what I was reading an interview with some novelist the other day that just thrilled me, and I can't remember who it was, who said their characters arrive fully fledged, including with names, and that's true of me.
Huh.
Annie just was Annie Brown from the very beginning, and so was Anne Marie. And so, I mean, this is gonna sound look, you go into a kind of, a fugue state in a way when you're writing a novel, in that the place and the people and the situations all become very, very real to you. If they don't, you're in trouble. You're writing a bad novel. And so there's almost a blindness to what's outside of that world that you're creating, so that I can honestly say that until my editor said to me, "There's a lot of A characters in this book," I hadn't totally made the connection that I needed to make.
Well, here's a question that follows just perfectly on what you've just said. She says, it sounds as though for Anna Quindlen, her characters have become almost real. How does her writing process lead to this?
First of all, I would take out that almost. I mean, they're really, really real to me.
Mhm.
In fact, once you're deep into it, there are moments in which the so-called real world doesn't really attach to you in the same way that they do. Um, I have, months of walking around time before I actually sit down and begin um, a novel, and most of that is thinking in first vague and then less vague ways about the protagonist of the book, and beginning to think about her, and it usually is a her birth order, her profession, her family, her friends, in ways that eventually make her become more and more vivid to me. I mean, when you know those things about a person, you begin to know the person. And so when I start to write, I usually have a pretty good handle, at least on that one character. Um, but as I go, I make discoveries about her and about her family and her friends, that I haven't had heretofore. Sometimes when you conjure people up, you know, you're looking at them head on, and then when you tilt your head a little bit, you see something else about their childhood, about how they feel about their work, about how they feel about their marriage, that you can explore in the book. But I think pretty early on, unless you're not feeling like they're real, um, again, you're in trouble. Because you want the reader to feel that too, and the reader won't feel it if you don't feel it.
Now, Annie's sister, Kathy, and Annie's very dearest friend, Anne Marie, don't exactly get along well together. How come?
Well, I think that sometimes your sister looks at your friends with sort of a squint, like, is this person really good for her? And there are a lot of people who look at Anne Marie that way. She's a big personality. She's really out there. I mean, no, three of the biggest wake ups when I was on book tour is in three different cities. Three different women came up to me and said, I hate Anne Marie. And the first time it happened, I went, "What?" Well,
Wow.
no, we don't hate Anne Marie. We love Anne Marie. But in each case, they felt that she was too hard on Annie, that she was always giving Annie a hard time. And I sort of thought, okay, I get what you're saying here, but sometimes we have friends with whom we share such intimacy that they can say almost anything to us, including the things that make us want to say to them, you need to shut up about that. And these girls have been friends since they were 6 years old. And Anne Marie is also not the kind of person who will hold back. But I think sometimes Kathy looks at Anne Marie and wants to say to her, you need to shut up. She doesn't entirely trust her, although I think that as the years go by and they both find that common ground of loving Annie, that will change.
Well, I must say, I cannot have you here on the show without turning to politics and especially women's rights. They're very much part of the presidential campaign right now. Some states barring abortion completely. Others now want to make mifepristone, the morning after pill, a controlled substance. I mean, this is really somehow turning back the clock. Some legislators are even calling for the ban of pregnancy prevention pills. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, you know what my thoughts are about this. My hair is on fire. I mean, it's astonishing to me. First of all, props to Melinda French Gates, who has now started her own foundation separate from her ex-husband, and wrote in the New York Times yesterday that she is earmarking $1 billion for women's rights organizations. But in that piece, she felt moved to say that it may be possible that her new granddaughter will have fewer rights than she has, which is
Yeah.
completely unacceptable for Ivy Crowayton, my 5-year-old granddaughter, to grow up with fewer rights than I have. Her
It really just makes me worry about even broader women's rights. I mean, are they going to tell us at what age we can marry? Are they going to tell us how many children we can or must have? Are they going to turn us back to the era before Roe v. Wade, back alley abortions, as they prosecute doctors who try to help women have an abortion? Is that what you see ahead of us?
No, it's not. First of all, in a technological age and in a global world and economy, it is much more difficult to police the bodies of women than it was pre-Roe. Second of all, what you're saying has made so many smart, powerful women lit in the way that Melinda French Gates is, in I hope in the way Mackenzie Scott will be, but women in political power, women in corporate power, that there is a tangible rising up of people and pushing back. We can't forget that for a significant number of the men, and it is largely men, making these decisions, this is not because they are true believers. It is because they're pandering to some portion of the electorate. And if the time comes, and I believe it will come soon, and certainly it came in Kansas with the vote on their state constitution and in Ohio, and it will come in other places. I hope it will come in Florida on election day. If the moment comes when they see the electorate turning against them on this, they will turn on a dime. They don't, I mean, they would love the good old days when men were men and women were handmaids, but if it means that they will lose elections, they will back they will back up and they will back off. And part of that will be this great uprising of women like you and women like me and women like our daughters saying, no, 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 no.
Now, have you heard the speeches some men have been making recently about the fact, and football players of all people, making speeches saying women really do belong in the home and should be there? I wonder, have you heard them? What's been your reaction?
Women will find their greatest satisfaction in taking care of children, which makes you wonder why we've been doing it for millennia and they seem to be phoning it in. Now, I will have to say that the men of my son's generations seem much more engaged in being nurturant, hands-on fathers. So I've got to put that out there. But this idea that we can't walk and chew gum at the same time is preposterous. The world is filled with women who love being mothers. I was one of I still am one of them. And who somehow managed to combine loving being mothers and being good at it with loving having work and being good at it. So I just look, about 20 to 25 years ago, I sat next to a historian at dinner and I was talking about how radically the world had changed in during my lifetime. How when I was a little girl, I thought I had two career paths I could follow. I could either be the mother of seven or I could be a Roman Catholic nun. And neither of them seemed like they were the right job for me. But not only had the world changed for me, it had changed so much for gay men and lesbians who are now able not only to be out, but to marry. It had changed so much, although not enough, clearly for people of color. Um, and that historian said to me, yes, but times of great social change are always followed by enormous spasms of reactionary response. And about 10 years ago, I suddenly thought, ah, here's the enormous spasm of reactionary response. Let's see how long it lasts.
Yeah, let's see how long it lasts. Here is another question from Sue. How do you think the book would have been different if the parent who died was the father?
Oh, it would have been
I
complete.
think that's a great question.
It really is. I mean, it would have been, I think to some extent we know the answer. Um, there would have been great grief. There would have been economic instability in a way that would have been um, really problematic. Um, but there wouldn't have been that sense of the world as they knew it falling apart in the same way. Um, I mean, I used to say sometimes, and again, this is somewhat out of date given the way men are now responding to parenthood, but I used to say sometimes that a family is like a wheel and the mother is that part in the center. And that when she's gone, the wheel just becomes a collection of sticks. And I think that that's what you see here. And I don't think that's what you see if Bill had died rather than Annie.
Yeah, I think had that been the case, there would have been, as you say, concerns about financial issues, especially if the mother had not been fully aware of what was happening with finances. I can remember that before my husband, 54 years, died, he could no longer balance his checkbook, which was horrific for him. And not only did he then turn over all the checking accounts to me, but then gave me about a 2-hour lecture on everything I needed to know. And I hope that somehow reading this book, your readers will understand how important it is that both family members know everything. I mean, Annie took care of many of the finances. Bill didn't know what to do. He didn't know who to call. He didn't know where to go. He needed to have that 2-hour lecture. But of course, Annie is so young. Who would have expected that she could possibly, in the kitchen, drop dead with no warning at all? And I hope you can finally see me. Can
I
you see?
can.
Yay!
You're as beautiful as ever, Diane.
Oh, thank you.
Oh
You're
my
very
gosh.
kind. You're very
You know, they
kind.
used to say about people, you have a face for radio, but every time I was with you, I'd think, she has a face for television.
Oh, I have always adored radio, so I'm so happy to be here. You all, I think, will have to forgive us for these technical difficulties, but I hope you are enjoying the conversation in any case. There is a question from Lana who says, who inspired the character of Anne Marie? She adds a lot of dimension to the story.
You know, I don't think anybody I knew inspired her. I think I just sort of conjured her up. You know, I've said it a lot on tour, but when I was going to go on book tour years ago, I mentioned it to Edgar Doctorow, the brilliant novelist, and he said to me, "Oh, Hannah, now you'll have to pretend we know how we do what we do." And I was quite relieved to hear him, of all people, say that, because I'd always thought I was the only one who didn't understand how we do what we do. I mean, it's it's so mysterious. We just sort of make up these stories, and then they become real. I mean, I was watching the slideshow at the beginning of this, and seeing so many great writers who do that. Alice McDermott, who I think should be the best known novelist in America,
I
and
just
my
love her.
oh, she's just a genius writer, and my friend Ann Patchett
Oh,
and Geraldine Brooks. I mean, all of these wonderful women who somehow conjure whole worlds on the page in a way that just completely enlarges the human experience. It's such a gift to all of us.
I'm going to go back to politics because I know that you, like me, must be concerned for the future of our democracy. Can you talk a bit about that?
It's very frustrating for me, Diane. I wrote my last Newsweek column in 2009, and what I wrote was that it was time, when possible, for the baby boomers to step aside, that we'd clogged every pipeline in this country, that we'd clogged the corporate pipelines and the punditry pipelines and the political pipelines, and that there were all these brilliant people in their 40s and 50s who couldn't move up in the way they used to, in the way John F. Kennedy did, in the way Theodore Roosevelt did, because there were all of us in our 70s and 80s holding on to position for dear life. And I've never felt that more than I feel it right now. I can't speak to the Republican Party because I feel most days like I have zero in common with them. But the Democratic political bench is deeper than it has ever been in my lifetime in terms of talent and possibility. And I just wish, I wish both parties were fielding people who spoke more to the future and less to the past. Of course, I hope that President Biden prevails because, as I keep saying to people, we don't elect a president, we elect an administration. And the administration that we will get with Donald Trump will be a disaster. The Secretary of State, the Attorney General, the people who run the departments that run the United States of America, and the administration that we have gotten in the Biden administration and will get again are people of great depth of field, to people who really understand the way the world works and the way the country should work. People like Pete Buttigieg and Gina Raimondo and Tony Blinken, those people. So we should keep in mind that we're electing an administration and that that's really important. But I keep thinking about 4 years from now when I hope all of these younger politicians who are governors and members of Congress will be stepping up and giving us something of a clean sweep.
Finally, Anna Quindlen, are you at work on a new novel?
I am. Well, I'm kind of not. Book tour and promoting a book sucks up a lot of time and
I know,
energy.
I
But
know.
I was going to say the plan, but it's not the plan. On Monday morning, I go back to the novel that I started probably 14 months ago when After Annie was completely locked. There was no more editing to be done. Everything that had to be done by Random House and not by me. And so I'd started another book, and I am very anxious to get back to it. And so is my editor.
Well, I certainly look forward to reading whatever comes next. After Annie is just beautiful, Anna. Thank you for writing it, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Well, as I said, Diane, anytime, anywhere with you.
Okay, I look forward to that. Thank you again. And of course, thanks to all of you who've not only been with us, but have endured all of these technical difficulties today. I do apologize not only for myself, but for the whole staff. We've been working so hard to try to correct things. And Kennedy Wright actually came to my apartment from the station to work out a camera for these closing minutes. So thank you all for sticking with us. And our next book club meeting is going to be on Wednesday, June 26th at 1 p.m. Eastern. Our June book club will feature Sipsworth by Simon Van Buey. I promise you, it is truly a powerful book about a friendship between an older woman and a mouse. Sounds strange, but true. And before you go, please do take a minute to fill out the screen a short survey about this event. is going to pop up for you. The book club is produced by Allison Brody. Allie Dickman is our events director. Our engineer today is Kennedy Wright, and we couldn't have been here without the support of Leslie Van Sant, Carly Cloud, Stuart Shapiro, Brenda Silva, who tried valiantly to fix things before we went on the air, and Michelle Morgan. Very special thanks to all of them and to you. I'm Diane Rehm. I hope to see you again next month. Bye-bye now.